Mr. Tucker, we definitely appreciate you giving us the time. My name is Captain Lemuel with Israel United in Christ, and we wanted to give you the floor to give us some understanding on the Native Americans, the slave trade, how they came here to the island, as well as what some challenges are that the Native Americans do face here on the island. So I'll just start with the first question. What can you give us some understanding on how the Native Americans got to the island?
It's a pleasure to share some of my knowledge. My name is St. Clair, known as throughout the island as Brinky, B-R-I-N-K-Y, Brinky Tucker. And had been involved in the history of St. David's for many years. My mother was born in St. David's Island. I have a lot of family living on the island. And as a result of what she told me, I decided to do some extensive research. The first known Native Americans and Negroes that came here to die for pearl. Didn't find any, and they left. And it was assumed they came from the Caribbean. And the captain took them back to the Caribbean. Now, around 1635, there was a Pequot War in Connecticut between the English and the Native Americans there. And obviously the English wanted what they had, which is land, and as a result there was a war. The English surrounded the Indian camp with guns and set their camp on fire, killing men, women, and children. And some of them escaped, and some were enslaved in Bermuda. They came by ship. The passage was unbearable to a lot because they were putting the hulls of ships. You know what I mean by hulls, below deck.
Right.
They ate, slept, used the bathroom, got wildly sick in those horrid conditions. Those who got wildly sick, they were taken up on deck and thrown overboard because that was money they couldn't get because they will bring them here to be sold. And because there were English people here that had got shipwrecked and passed the word around that it was an ideal place to have slaves, and it was a money-making business. Mm-hmm. Like the drug trade, the more bodies you got, the more money you made with regards to Native Americans. The trading point or port was in St. George's, that's the eastern end of the island. That was the main trading port. And right in the town of St. George, they sold their slaves, Native American slaves, to people living in St. George's first and St. David's. Those left over went island wide. Not all Native Americans were sent to St. David's. Now, St. David's was an area of 500 acres. And when they saw what was needed, because there weren't many people living on St. David's at the time, mainly white people. As I stated, they went island wide. And the word got out, and as a result, many more slaves, Native American slaves were born here. There was the King Philip War that took place in 1675 in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Again, the English had guns and the Indians had bows and arrows. There was no contest. And they captured a lot of the slaves, Indians, and they shipped them here. Their leader escaped, and he was captured in Bristol, Rhode Island, and he was quartered. By that I mean he was tied to a post and cut up in pieces as a deterrent to the other Indians if they want to object to the English taking their land. That was the consequences. Now in 1675, Wampanoag Indian was sent here, amongst others, to be enslaved. And he was living in Fletch area. I don't know if you know where the aquarium is in that area. And he strongly objected to being enslaved. And he devised a plan to kill his masters. And his plan was to break into his master's house, steal his gun, go outside, fire the gun in the air. And when the masters and the family ran out to investigate, he was going to shoot because he just hated to be enslaved. When he fired the gun, everything went to plan. He fired the gun, the master and his family ran outside. And when they were confronted by him, the gun misfired. He was apprehended, prosecuted, and there's an island in Let's Inlet called Gibbets Island. He was taken there and quartered. And before he was quartered, they gathered all the Indians and slaves in the area to witness this. And as I state, the quartered, he was cut up in pieces. Some body parts went east, some went west as a deterrent. And I must say, the English kept records. Little did they know one day we'll read them. Mm-hmm. And that's how I'm able to tell you these stories, because we did research in the archive and I found this information, plus other information. I have a blood relative. If you look at her, she looks Caucasian. She's mixed. And she was working there as a summer student. And one day she came to me, she says, Uncle Brinky, there's a lot of information in the back. They're not going to let you see it. I said, when your boss goes to lunch, copy it. Mm-hmm. So said, so done. And as a result, I was able to get a lot of information. Mm-hmm. Now the station or the chief of the Wampanoag tribes, White was enslaved in Bermuda as well as his son. They wanted to break up the entire family. And the son was enslaved in St. David's, and the wife was enslaved in Bayless Bay, right on Bayless Bay corner. The old Otter Bridge house, as you're traveling west, right on Bayless Bay corner, is a very large house sitting on the map here, and the slave cottage was adjacent to it. Mm. And like I said, the conditions that slaves were forced to live under was horrific. You know, and in 1600s, we have discovered that Indians were living in Somerset, all the way to the other end of the island, because as I stated, when there were no landowners in the eastern part of the island, they went island-wide. And subsequently, there's a family in Somerset, that's the western end of the island, who did the genealogy, and they traced the Indian slave woman that was brought here in the late 1600s to the slave master. It took them years to do the research, and they have it, black and white. And as I stated earlier, the English kept records. Little did they know we would read them. Then they implemented a system that the Indians were forbidden to speak their language. The only language they knew, because they couldn't speak English because they weren't taught English. Mm-hmm. And there were no jails here for about 100 years. So the penalty was swift. It was a minor offense Indians committed, and blacks, you got a flogging. But it was a bit more serious, they were hung. And Indian women who were found guilty of speaking their own language to their child, they were bound hand and foot and thrown overboard. And if they bobbled to the top, they were immediately taken out of the water and hung. Men were given an alternative. Men were immediately hung. There's 5 places on the eastern part of the island where they were hung. And like I said, they didn't have any jail, so the system was swift. The early Bermuda history was started in St. Peter's Anglican Church. It's still being used, the oldest Anglican church in the Western Hemisphere is still being used. Mm-hmm. And after they, later on in 1623, the old State House was built. That's the oldest standing building in Bermuda. And the governor and the House of Assembly and the court system is set up there. It's a very small building, just off to the square, up on a slight hill. And that's where all the laws were made and everything. And hanging took place right just outside the door, you know. And again, I re-emphasize that they were in charge and they did justice their life. And for many, many years, there were insufficient women to satisfy the needs of these English men. So the slaves had to substitute, and they took advantage of them in their bed, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, it brought on a mixture of races. In addition, the English enslaved English prisoners of war from Ireland and Scotland and Wales. They brought them here as slaves to work, and they put them on St. David's Island. And they interbreeded with the Native Americans and the blacks. So for many years, St. David's Island was, some of my complexion, natural blonde hair and blue eyes. They were just, you like the United Nations on feet. They were all mixed up. You know, they were all mixed up. And during my genealogy, I'm part black, part Indian, part white. I'm the United Nations on feet. You know, and it's all through my family, all through St. David's, you know. And education wasn't a priority. For many years, they had 2 small buildings for the people of color to go to school. And as far as the education they received was just mainly primary education. They went to school, and after that, they went to work in fields. They fished, farmed, and St. David's was isolated. In other words, the only way you can get on St. David's Island was by swim or by boat. It's 500 acres. And they kept to themselves. They intermarried, first cousins marrying first cousins, or having children building up first, second, third cousin. They just kept to themselves. They lived a very simple life because the rest of the island shunned them. They said they were stupid, they were retarded, they were ignorant people. And the fishermen, when they went fishing, they traded their fish for the vegetables that were grown by the farmers. So that's how they survived for many, many, many years. But over time, they started to venture out and travel on ships overseas as slaves, and some were non-slaves, and they realized that people in other parts of the world lived a better life than them, and they brought their knowledge back to St. David's, and they encouraged them to do better. You know, and then during the Second World War, a group of white men decided to just take some of their property and gave it to the United States to put an Air Force base there. And as a result, as I stated, St. David's was 500 acres, now it's 1,000 acres. The United States brought in a lot of rubble and field, and apart from taking the property, they just made a move. They made them to live in shacks, or they paid them pittance for whatever they took from them. And there's a monument in St. David's, not on the roundabout there towards Clearwater Beach, which indicates, acknowledges the fact that this happened. You know, but and then their accent was different. They spoke English, but their accent was. I'll give you an example. If you see something you haven't seen forever, something you strange, and you would say, "Now look at that." Well, they say "nakia," which means the same thing. Where the terminology came from, or the words came from, going on the nerves. It could have come from another language. Or they say "nakia," which means "now look at that." My mother helped me quite a bit, and my wife, she came from another part of the island, and she says, "Translate for me what they're saying. I don't understand what they're saying." I said, "They're speaking English. Listen to them." She said, "I don't know what." But they knew what they were saying, and they're talking amongst themselves. And they kept their distance from people that made fun of them. You know, there were a lot of fights, and you know, they was asked to call anything but the right name. There was a fight. Even when they went to primary school off St. David's and went to St. George, there was a lot of fights because they weren't the brightest. and they all looked different. They spoke different. Their accent was different. And they ate a lot of fish and vegetables, kept to themselves.
What is a nation?
Nation is men leading by example. Nation is family.